Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be participating in this conference today. My name is Sandra and I'm head of transport at the Climate Group. Very happy to share a little bit today about our experiences with our EV100 initiative, together actually with Marcella, Berta, Mauri from HP, who will be sharing some insights about what the participation in EV100 means for them as an individual company in the second part of this keynote that we're sharing today. I want to start by sharing actually some news from just a couple of weeks ago from the international climate negotiations, also known as COP26, where for the first time we had a global EV declaration, which was the Glasgow Declaration on the transition to 100% zero emission cars and vans. And I think it was a very key moment because for the first time it brought together over 100 stakeholders, including countries, manufacturers, cities, fleets, investors, to all sign up to a joint vision of moving to fully electric or zero emission vehicles by 2035 in all the key countries, and by no later than 2040 in all the countries where the transition might be a little bit harder to achieve. This did raise a lot of attention in the media. Of course, there were also discussions about those that hadn't participated, certain countries that you would still want to join the declaration, the question of why some OEMs had signed and others had not. And I think that is a very good conversation to have, because of course, ultimately it's all about the climate urgency, knowing that we need to halve emissions within this decade and knowing that clean transport can play a huge part within that. But I think the main takeaway here really is also that for the first time we were having this conversation in that way, and that you did have major OEMs participating in the commitment. And if we look at all the commitments together, those that signed in terms of population cover territories with 2 billion people. And in terms of the OEMs, they represent 1 in 4 vehicles sold at this stage. So that's obviously quite an important market share. And I think really a reflection of the momentum that we're seeing building for electromobility around the world. This also reflects the broader market development. Bloomberg New Energy Finance, on the occasion of COP26, did an analysis to look at the very latest market state, and in particular to compare how much the world has changed since the previous COP in 2019. And as you can see on the graph here, one of the big takeaways really is that we see the market accelerating, and we see the forecast for how fast the market is going to be able to move forward in the future accelerating as well. So we're seeing here the prediction curves of the likes of the IEA, OPEC, but also BNEF itself getting steeper and steeper every year. And I think that very much demonstrates where the market is going. We have a few data points there on the right about the number of vehicles sold on an annual basis, which have now risen to 5.6 million. We have over 500 models available on the market to buy. And we also see that the sales targets of manufacturers and the investment potential that's out there in the market is steadily growing. So I think we're clearly seeing the market moving to that up the famous S-curve and getting to the even more accelerated bits. All of this is, amongst others, driven by fleets. So fleets, in any case, can play a very crucial role, because about a quarter of vehicles on the roads around the world are part of fleets, public or private ones. But because they are much more intensively used than the typical private vehicle, they make up 2/3 of the emissions on the road. So if we are to have emissions within this decade, fleets absolutely need to be part of it. And they also have an opportunity to lead. We did, together with Systemic earlier this year, publish a study that was looking at this in quantitative terms. And we found that if even just the light duty and the bus fleets in key markets were to electrify by 2030, then not only would we be able to save an additional amount of emissions that's equivalent to the annual emissions of India, which is the 3rd largest polluter in the world, but also you would have some very important sort of effects on the overall market development. Amongst others, the used car market. Company cars tend to move into second-hand markets much faster than the private vehicle would. So by moving fleets to electric first, you would also increase the second-hand market by an extra 40% by 2030. You would also reduce the battery reduction cost by another 14%, which is crucial to drive the price cost down. And ultimately, this would mean reaching the tipping point for price parity without subsidies up by a year. And also, obviously, from a public health benefits point of view, there'd be another 120,000 premature deaths that we could avoid annually by 2030 that are currently caused by air pollution from road transport. All of that, I think, is a great incentive for companies really to engage. That's why I'm excited to be here and talk to you today. And what we have done to help companies not just make this transition sort of quietly in their own operations, but to be public about it, to be vocal about it, to inspire others, and to also be part of the dialogue with manufacturers and with policymakers about how we can achieve the transition. We have created our corporate leadership initiative, EV100, which has now been in place since September 2017. And ultimately is about all these companies around the world, 120 total at this stage, committing to go electric by 2030, which means switching their own fleets. And it also means installing charging infrastructure at their retail spaces or workplaces. This is the slide that sort of is exploding the template I've been given a little bit. I hope I'll be forgiven. This is to show the members that we have involved today. We're very proud that it's a very global group, and it's also a group that covers all sectors. As I said earlier, we have Marcella with us today from HP, who will talk a little bit more later about what the EV100 journey has meant specifically for HP. And I was really excited to see a few EV100 members, other EV100 members in the program today as well, from ABB, Unilever, AstraZeneca. So I think that's also a testament to the fact that companies who do take these bold commitments, it tends to make them become thought leaders about clean transport, about how to do things in newer, better, more climate-friendly ways across the board. And to highlight a little bit what this adds up in total, because ultimately this is really about aggregation. This is showing how many fleets around the world are already moving to electromobility and doing this at a very speedy and ambitious pace. So I said we have 120 members right now, and it keeps continuously growing. But across those members, if you look at the stats, it's over 5 million vehicles already that have been committed to going electric. We do an annual report where we ask our members about their progress, which always happens in September. September last year, when we still had a lot less members, it was already 170,000 vehicles on the road as well, electric vehicles. So of course it's about commitments, and it's about then also turning the commitments into action. What we can already see that these fleets together already make a big impact. And of course, their individual progress is then also accelerated by being able to learn from each other and to work together as a group. And this graph I also like to show for a moment every time, because it shows the global impact of those commitments, or the companies that join at group level. So you see here all the black dots are where those companies are headquartered around the world. That is already a global spread in itself. But then you see all the orange territories are also where those companies also have offices or other types of presences. So we see that by making a commitment at headquarter level, at group level, that also has an impact around the world. And that is very much what we're aiming for with EV100, because then we can spread the learnings and the leadership and the experience much faster. The final point I want to make from our point of view, leadership in this day and age is not just about quietly doing the right thing, in your own operations, in your own fleets. It's also about standing up for what you believe in and being an active part in the public debates that will help shape the future, because ultimately we are not going to get the emission reductions that we need by switching fleets one by one. What we ultimately need is to change the market so that electric vehicles become the new normal. And I'm sharing here a few of the examples of the policy work that we're doing with our members around the world, engaging with policymakers, talking about why ambition is important, but then also talking about the measures that we need to turn that into reality. You see here as one example, in the UK, we've done a lot of work to help the government gain the confidence to move from a 2040 to a 2030 ICE phase-out date. And we're now actively engaging with them to establish the measures to make that happen, such as the ZEF mandate, for example. And we're similarly doing work in the US with the new Biden administration, in Germany, in France, at the European level with the Fit for 55 package, etc. I think it's really important to understand that companies are ready to lead. They have an opportunity to lead. There's an economic incentive to lead, but also the framework conditions are important. And the more companies work together and are vocal about these needs, the more they can be partners for government, and the more we can make the transition faster and better and more prosperous ultimately for all of us. So I will stop with here. Hopefully I've given you some food for thought, and I will now hand over to Marcella Berta Mauri, who's Global Fleet Strategist at HP, and who will talk a little bit more about the EV100 journey specifically for HP. Thank you very much.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Marcella Berta Mauri, Global Fleet Strategist at HP, Inc. I'm going to present the EV adoption across the globe of our company. At a glance, HP is a company, an IT company focused on PC and printer business for both consumer and commercial clients, and we have about 60 billion revenues, 55,000 employees across 170 countries. We have 250,000 channel partners, 27,000 patents, and we have receiving several awards for responsibility and sustainability goals. Regarding the HP fleet, so we have about 4,600 vehicles in 35 countries globally. We have mostly tool cars, but we have 20% of per cars. We have 174 vans in US mostly, and we have 2 fleet management and leasing companies. Our costs in fleet is about $50 million on yearly basis. And we have a fleet that is broken down more or less 50-50 in EMEA and Americas, mostly in the US. And we have also a small fleet in APJ. Our biggest commitment in terms of sustainability is the reduction of CO2 emission by 2025. And we have a goal to electrify our fleet by 2030. And we have 3 pilots running. I will provide more details on this area in my next slides. About HP vision. So HP has recently taken some bold step with a 2030 vision to become the most sustainable and just technology company. And this can be reached through 3 pillars: climate change, human rights, and digital divide. Obviously, with fleet program, we can impact on the first pillar, where HP want to drive towards a net zero carbon, fully regenerative economy by creating the most sustainable portfolio technology, service, and solution. How fleet is helping or supporting this goal? So if we focus on the right side of the slide, we have increased our goal from 10 to 25% CO2 emission by 2025, and this is in line with the fleet green initiatives that we took in fiscal year 21. We are basically committing to move 100% of the fleet to EV by 2030. And these commitments are based on a few important considerations. So for infrastructure, we are expecting to have an increase, 30% year-over-year increase in US for public chargers, in EMEA to double fast chargers by 2024. The TCO parity is reached in several markets in Europe, but is going to be reached also in North America between 23 and 25, with the battery costs fully significantly reduced. And we have put on the table also a funding or co-funding home chargers for our employees, depending on the countries and the markets. If we look on the left side, this transition is based on a phased approach. We are in phase 1, EV pilots, Netherlands, Belgium, US. I will tell you more about these 3. We have in the pipeline phase 2, 4 pilots in Canada, France, Spain, and US for the vans. And between 23 and 24, we are going to launch pilot across the markets. And we are planning to have EV as standard offering for US and Canada ordering cycles. And from the 25 to 29, the EV will become a base vehicle globally to reach the goal of the 2030, 100% EVs. For us, it's very important the EV 100 program, of which we are founding members. In 2017, HP committed to install EV infrastructure at all feasible sites by 2040. And this year, in April, we took a second commitment. So we doubled down our commitment to convert our fleet to 100%, building on our 2000. As announced this publicly. Which are the key results and next step? So the 2 pilots in Europe, Netherlands and Belgium, they were launched in November 20 and January 21st, respectively. We have ordered 100 battery electric vehicles in the first 9 months, and we have already 35 of the fleet transition to EV, that is overachieved our expectations or goals. In US, we have set up a full hybrid model as our base vehicles. We renewed all our fleet during the 21. And the actual results in terms of fuel on the road, basically the new hybrid model is reducing 41% compared to the previous model in petrol. And considering the full fleet in US, this means a reduction, 36% in CO2. And we have also launched a pilot with 26 battery electric vehicles that has been delivered between September and November, and this will impact our CO2 emissions in the next years. As a next step, we will send driver satisfaction survey to these EV drivers to learn about their experience and to build on that for future pilots. And we are finalizing the implementation plan for the pilots foreseen for our fiscal year 22 that are France, Spain, Canada, and US vans. I want to spend a moment on the graph because basically at the beginning of fiscal year 21, so last November, we were having basically only diesel and petrol. And after 1 year, now in November 21, we have this breakdown. So we have 45% diesel, we have 21 petrol, but we have jumped to 30% hybrid, mostly because of the US. And then we have about 100 battery electric vehicles, but also we have more than 100 plug-in hybrid in some markets. So the pictures is looking very promising and very aligned with our goals. When it comes to lesson learned, we have found the local management very supportive on our EV pilots. We have seen drivers very excited to be part of the company sustainability strategy. And we are seeing and we have learned that EV pilot eligibility criteria should be defined at country basis. The TCO parity is reached in several markets between ICE and EVs, driven also by local government incentive and higher residual values now for the EVs. Battery ranges are allowing EV to be adopted by sales fleet. We have also seen the lower driving taxation really accelerating the EV adoption. And we are also seeing the smart home charging solution recommended, and the funding model can depend on local incentives. I hope this presentation can be useful for your own adoption. And I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.